Do you ever have a game announcement that just clicks with you? One that's not from a pre-existing series or franchise, but rather a brand new IP to be seen and experienced. I haven't really had that for a while. Most of my excitement comes from games or series that I already have an interest in. It's a rare exception that I see a game announcement for something new that also catches my attention. That recent exception being Kena, Bridge of Spirits. This game was announced during Sony's 2020 State of Play, which was also the same livestream that fully unveiled the PlayStation 5. This showing was incredible mostly. The lineup was so damn strong and varied, but the moment that Kena's trailer began, I was awestruck. It was so gorgeous and fluently animated. We didn't get too much gameplay, only a few clips, but it was shown to be a fun action-adventure type game. But the more I watched it, I felt like something was familiar, as if I'd seen this kind of style before. And then it was shown who was behind this project. Ember Lab, and I immediately recognized this name. I had been following their projects for a while on YouTube, as they are primarily a filmmaking and animation team, with their magnum opus, in my opinion, being their Majora's Mask fan film Terrible Fate. This short is incredible and really showcases the maximum abilities they have as artists. And the fact they were making a full game being backed by Sony with what looked to be a fairly big budget was really awesome to see.
This game intrigued me from the moment I first saw it, and apparently it did so for a bunch of other people. This was one of the big talking points when that live stream was over, and to see that amongst fans was honestly kind of wonderful.
I have a feeling that the game's graphics were definitely one of the biggest selling points, and in combination with the other graphical showcases that year, like the new Ratchet & Clank and Spider-Man Miles Morales, the PS5 was looking to be a powerhouse with what it could do. And it definitely made the thing popular, because even in the year 2022, it's still difficult to get your hands on one of these. We are almost 2 years into this console's life, and you are still required to go through so many hoops and hurdles just to get a chance at owning one. I was lucky to get mine as early as I did, all thanks to my girlfriend, who I love very much. Go! What are you doing? To go on a quick tangent, I love the PS5. It has been the console I've been using the most this past year, whether it's for playing games or streaming. I've clocked in a lot of hours on this thing. My current PS5 library, at least physically, is a little lacking, but having access to all of my PS4 games immediately bumps up the value for me. So valuable that I've made a few countermeasures should anyone try to steal it. The games I have played on this console really make me excited for the future of the medium. Stuff on here can look unbelievable, and I think that's a great first thing to talk about. Kena Bridge of Spirits is one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. The environments are so gorgeously rendered, regardless of what condition they're in. Whether they're sunny, rainy, or corrupted, these locations look top-notch. Combined with the incredible lighting design in each area, the atmosphere in this game is second to none. The only sour note I have, and this really is just a nitpick, is that some of the textures do look a little low-res when viewed up close, although you only ever see that when you use the game's photo mode, so it's not really that fair of a comparison. But other than that, I have no complaints, and that also goes for the game's art design. Mike and Josh Greer, who are the lead creative developers of this game and Ember Lab, had partnered with the Vietnamese animation team Sparks for development, and had drawn heavily from East and Southeast Asian cultures. A lot of the locations were heavily inspired by many areas of Japan and Bali, and while I couldn't find the exact locations of where their inspirations came from, I think it's safe to say that they drew heavily from the country's rural areas. It really brings the world of Kena to life, and I think that's one of its strongest elements, especially narratively. The game begins explaining how in this world, wooden masks are carved to honor the dead, and their gradual turn to dust symbolizes a spirit's passing into the next world. However, not all spirits can travel through, as some struggle with tragedies that occurred while they were alive, and the longer they linger, the more dangerous they become, with the only way to appease them is with the help of a spirit guide. Enter Kena, a young spirit guide who, while making the rounds, discovers a mysterious spirit who is particularly dangerous. She follows his trail through the forest before coming upon these little black creatures, as well as two children named Benny and Saya, who say their brother is missing. It doesn't take long to finally arrive at their village and see that it's been corrupted by the same poison that came from that spirit. Upon purifying the village center, we are met with the former village elder, Zajuro, who explains to us that these little black creatures called Rot have taken a liking to Kena. She tells him that she is looking for the sacred mountain shrine for reasons that we don't know yet, but corruption from the spirit has blocked the passageway to said shrine, with the only way to clear it is by purifying the rest of the areas around the village. From here, the plot kinda takes a backseat, as we go to each area on the map to help the corrupted spirits pass on to the next world. This is what takes up most of the game's narrative, and I'm kind of on and off about it. On the one hand, it does feel a bit contrived and video gamey. There's a main area you are trying to reach, but we can't go there until we do these other things that coincidentally allow us to pass forward. The only major thing we discover that advances the plot is that something happened at the mountain shrine which allowed the corruption to spread, but that's essentially it until we get close to the end of the game. Most of the plot is a series of side missions that need completing in order to advance the story, which I could see as feeling a little stagnant. On the other hand though, what these side missions are lacking in plot is made up for by the great backstories and world building we get from helping each of these spirits. We quickly learn that none of the bosses in this game were intended to be malicious or evil, but rather someone who could not bring themselves to pass on to the next world because of their own turmoil. This is the real meat of Kana's story, as the people you help have such rich history behind them and such likable personalities that when you see them fall because of a traumatic experience, it is legit heartbreaking. The first one you help is the little kid's missing brother Taro, who has lost their parents at a young age, thus leaving the boy to look after his little siblings. When they had gone looking for more food and supplies, Taro got separated from Benny and Saya after the corruption from the mountain exploded, killing all of them. Yeah, everyone in the village is dead because of the corruption, and that includes Benny and Saya. This game has 2 dead toddlers, and for some reason Arkham Knight's rated M. I don't even think science can explain that one. But Taro was so distraught over the death of his siblings that the corruption eventually just took him. That's honestly really tragic, but it works well once we see them reunite with Benny and Saya after Kana saves him. It's honestly a really beautiful moment. The same thing can be said about the spirits Hana and Adira. The two of them found a way to harness the mountain's energy into the village heart, but when it started to fade, a harsh famine took over their home. Hana left to find food and supplies, but ultimately never returned. It's heavily implied that she died on her journey, but Adira refuses to believe this as she builds a tall tower to help her lover find her way home. But just like clockwork, the mountain goes boom! And the same thing happens as with Taro. Hana's spirit helps us forward, we fight the corrupted spirit and reunite Adira with Hana, thus purifying the area. Things only start to take a turn when we are given passageway to the mountain shrine to confront the spirit we had met in the beginning. The spirit finally reveals himself as a man named Toshi, who was once the leader of the village. Kana tries to find out why he was corrupted, but he's able to resist and massively overpowers her, taking control of the rot and even, I'm gonna assume, kills her? It's a little vague as to what happened here. And this is the only time we are given some honest-to-God hints as to what Kana's past was like, as she meets a child version of herself looking for her father.
Ooh, this is fascinating.
The scene's over and she meets up with the elder.
That was so cool!
I feel like something must have gotten cut here because I would have loved to have played through that spirit area and get some more backstory on Kana. This is my biggest issue with the game's story. The most unremarkable part about it is unfortunately Kana herself. Now, I'm not saying she's a bad character, far from it. I think she's extremely likable and charming throughout the game. Want an example? Anytime she interacts with the rot is the cutest damn thing. The problem is, we know next to nothing about her or the events that transpired beforehand. She explains to Zajuro that her father was also a spirit guide, and when she was very little, he had died, presumably trying to guide a harmful spirit. This is the only time we are directly told why Kana became a spirit guide to begin with, and she hoped that by reaching the mountain shrine, she could see him and show how much she has grown as a spirit guide. I said guide 4 times in the same paragraph. I gotta use this website more often. Her want is very clear when she tells Zajuro, but that's just it. She tells him and the audience close to the end of the game, and at no point beforehand did we see any real hint as to why she was going on this journey to begin with. I feel like a few scenes with Kana and her father to establish their relationship could have helped give me a better understanding behind her wants as a character. Maybe at the start of the game, that opening text could have actually been a speech that her father gave her when she was a child explaining what a spirit guide is. I also feel like, while we do know what Kana's want is, we never learn what her need is. How does defeating the corrupted spirit ultimately complete her journey, not just physically, but emotionally? I feel the story doesn't answer that properly. We learn as to why Toshi became such a corrupted and violent spirit. When the famine had came over the village, Toshi had set off to the mountain shrine in hoping of finding answers, despite being told that the sickness was just a part of nature set forth by their god and they should move on. Toshi, being so held up with pride, went anyway, and when the rot god didn't answer him, he attacked it, thus kicking off the explosion from the mountain. The one that, need I remind you, killed everyone in the village, including 2 toddlers. Again, that's perfectly fine, but this gets the R rating?
I love consistency.
I feel like any sympathy that the game wanted me to feel for Toshi kinda gets thrown out the window when he's responsible for killing everyone that he was trying to protect. Yeah, it's tragic, but he still murdered a bunch of people. When once we get back on our feet, we face Toshi again and finally get through to him, with Kana helping the man forgive himself for failing the village. Doing so, his and Zajiro's spirit are able to move on to the afterlife, and the rock god is free from the corruption, ending with Kana meditating on the mountain shrine. And that's the game's story, and overall, yeah, I'd say I enjoyed it a good deal. I do think it loses something towards the end of the journey in regards to Toshi's redemption, and also, I really wanted to know more about Kana as we played. Again, I love her personality and design, both just ooze with charm. And helping that is her actor, Diwa Eudui Larasanti. I really apologize if I mispronounced that. She is fantastic in this game, incredibly calm and likable while still being able to let her vulnerability shine through for the more dramatic scenes. I just wish she was given a bit more to work with. The entire cast is great as well, everyone does an A+ job here. While I think the overall quality of the writing is a little hit or miss, the way they execute it is damn near perfect. Good lord, every cinematic in this game is on par with something from Pixar. The movements are fluent, the shots are composed and lit beautifully, the editing is top notch, especially during the flashbacks. Maybe I'm just not used to this since most cinematic type games more try to capture the feeling of real life filmmaking as if it were a live action movie or show. So I'm not really used to a game taking full advantage of the medium of animation to tell its story. It's great stuff. Maybe it leans a tiny bit into the realm of style over substance, but the substance isn't bad, I just wish there was more of it. And that sentence, I think, could be applicable across the whole game. There's a lot I really like here. I just wish it was expanded upon a bit further. Which, to be fair, I would much rather have than trying to do something that it couldn't, but I would be lying if I said the game was breaking ground in the gameplay or structure department. Kana is pretty straightforward when you get down to it. It's an action-adventure game. A big world with tons of secrets to find and baddies to beat up. And I guess I'll start there. The combat is pretty simple when you get the hang of it. You have a light attack for quick jabs and chip damage, and a heavy attack that's slower but dishes out more pain. The moveset works fine as it is, but there isn't really much room for combos or variety with how you swing the staff. You can't really chain the two types of attacks together since the heavy attack requires so much windup in order to use it, and against faster enemies, it's not very reliable in its base form. If you try to tank hits and attack enemies relentlessly, then you're not going to get very far. The enemies can and will swing right through your attacks, knocking you to the ground. This is where the game shows that it's better to play more on the defensive side rather than offensive. Your dodge roll is shockingly fast, and with good timing, you can avoid almost every type of attack barring a few boss fights, and your block is an omnidirectional shield that keeps you safe for the time being until it runs out of energy. This combination works pretty well early on when every enemy stays on the ground and are in fewer numbers, but the further you play, the more varieties of enemies there are to fight. This is where I think you can feel the limited move pool of Kana's combat, at least on the base value. There's only so much you can do with hitting your opponents and dodging attacks, and at first I was worried that the game would keep it this basic the whole way through. That is, until you realize the true value of the rot. These little guys really help the game shine a lot brighter while playing. The rot essentially act as a supportive element throughout the campaign. You can use them to solve puzzles and navigate through the area, but their real value comes in combat, as you can use them to mess with the enemies and stagger them for a little bit, giving you a chance to get some extra hits in, and where I think they're best utilized is in combination with your attacks to give them some added impact. My favorite being the charged heavy slam. This does a lot of damage and can be a great tool against the boss fights. The further you progress, you unlock two new abilities for Kana to use, the Spirit Bow and the Spirit Bombs. The bow is self-explanatory, it's a bow and arrow, great against long-range targets, but pretty weak against the bigger enemies. The bombs are pretty great early on, they could do some decent damage, and depending on how close you are, you could set them off early to help control the battle. However, when you start leveling stuff up, the edge clearly goes to the bow and arrow. Good lord, some of the stuff you can do with this thing is disgusting. You can use the rot to charge one of your arrows, and this attack does a great amount of damage, even against bigger foes, and you can even gain an ability to slow down time while aiming so you can get a better shot in. This is awesome, especially in a heated fight. The bombs are still useful, make no mistake, but I found that the upgrades didn't match the kind of stuff you could do with the bow. I found that I used them more when traversing through the world, as their explosion could be used to suspend certain platforms in stasis for you to jump on. Now that I think about it, I actually use the bombs more for traveling than I did during actual combat. They are often used to find certain pathways and shortcuts you can use to find your way back through a certain area. Same thing goes for the bow. You can use it to knock over certain bridges and obstructions. You can also use it for these little tether things to get from one place to another, and that was kind of cool. It certainly made navigating easier, as the world design is another thing that I'm kind of on and off with. On the one hand, I love the way these areas look. They are given very distinct styles to help them stand out from each each other. You have a more lush and natural setting when going through the forest, a more rural feel when you go through the abandoned village, and more of a spiritual feel when you go through the temple. Going through these areas the first time is perfectly fine. It's practically a straight shot going forward and solving whatever challenges face you along the way. It's the process of locating things after you've purified the area that I feel Kana's level design ultimately suffers the most. While the environments are absolutely gorgeous, I feel that it's a bit too easy to get lost in sometimes, mainly the forest area since it's primarily hallways of trees or large open areas with forks in the road. There are a few key locations like Rusu's house, a giant tree commune, and the cliffside, but 9 times out of 10 I find myself opening up the map constantly just so I can find out where I am in relation to everything else. The abandoned village and shrine are a bit better since there are more discernible landmarks, but these areas are huge and a bit confusing to navigate through on your first time. The nice thing is that not too far into the game, you are given the ability to warp to different areas on the map, which thankfully cuts backtracking down a lot. This is also where I get reminded of the console's power. A game as graphically complex as this has next to no load times and the warping takes less than 5 seconds. This thing is capable of so much, but is it capable of love? Backtracking is only something you have to do in order to get the optional stuff like extra experience points or even more rot to add to your team. That is something about this game that I find really fulfilling. The process of collecting rot and getting even more super moves in combat is extremely satisfying. Now there are a few snags I ran into, and while the game is by no means unpolished, I did run into a few bugs during my playthrough that I feel could have been ironed out before release. It's nothing game-breaking, it's just a little random bounce of jank like standing on a visible object, or right before the final boss you go, "Rocket!" I don't know how this got by. It's so easy to do since all you had to do was just jump in this area. It did keep me from spawning in the boss, so I did have to reset my game, but that's really about as bad as the bugs get. The rest of the time, it performs perfectly fine, especially on the right graphics modes. Much like other graphically vibrant games, Kana has 2 graphics modes to choose from, Fidelity and Performance, with the former giving you the best visuals and a lower frame rate, and Performance lowering the quality to give you a higher frame rate. Fidelity mode does look really nice, but unless you're playing on a 4K display, you're not really going to see much of a difference. And honestly, the choppier frame rate just looks less appealing to me personally, and it also hinders the gameplay somewhat. This game is very reaction heavy in order to avoid attacks. You need the extra frames to get more responsiveness out of the controls, since Kana can be shockingly difficult. I played on normal mode, and some of these bosses utterly wiped the floor with me. You need to play extra carefully against these guys, since usually there are only 2 health refills in the arena you fight in. Don't fight these recklessly, just stay on the defense and wait for your opening to attack. When you find a pattern that works, you should be fine, and I like that. The bosses in this game are awesome though. Even with them being difficult, they're never cheap. Every death I suffer was because of me being reckless or impatient, which isn't very hard to do in my case. I mean, do you see the kind of games I play? But you need to play by their rules, and when you do, it's a nail-biting, tense as hell fight, and when you eventually beat them, it's such a satisfying feeling. It also helps that you often get the cinematic cutscenes after beating them, which is a great reward as far as I'm concerned. I think it's funny though that Kana talks these corrupted spirits down out of a frenzy after literally beating the hell out of them. Imagine her as a therapist. Ow! Be happy! Alright! If you want an easier time with the bosses, then I'd say explore as much of the area as you can to find more rotten XP. You still have to be careful in these fights, but at least this way you could dish out some more pain. Again, if you've ever played an action-adventure game or an action RPG before, this is nothing new. It's not very deep mechanically, but the process of getting more rot and getting stronger is still satisfying, and it puts me in a good mood. And I think that's a good way of describing Kana Bridge of Spirits. It's not very deep, but it puts me in a good mood. It takes the fundamentals that have been established in games like Dark Souls, Kingdom Hearts, and Zelda, and sticks to them without trying to rework the whole system. It plays to its strengths, and while that ultimately makes this rather safe conceptually, the strengths are not to be ignored. It's absolutely insane to me that an indie game was able to display such craft and ambition on such a grand scale. Yeah, this is technically an indie game, and this is the quality here. I am anxious to see what this game could do if given a AAA budget. Yes, I have some gripes with the overall story, and the gameplay when you get down to it isn't that unique, but the world they were able to create and the passion that shines through the creators is so present in this game that I can't help but really admire it. I don't see myself doing another full playthrough anytime soon, but I do like to load it up every once in a while just to get some more collectibles and to mess around with the game's photo mode. I know that having a photo mode in games now is kind of commonplace, but the level of control you have over the image is quite frankly scary. It's playing to my inner photographer. God, I am out of practice. I need to start making some more photos again. And with the freedom you have, you can make some gorgeous images. Here are some of the ones I did. It's nice when a group of artists like Ember Lab also give you the ability to make some art of your own. Kana Bridge of Spirits is a keeper, and considering what was done here and how it was one of the PS5's best-selling games the month it came out, I really hope we see more from this team. I highly recommend it. Okay, I'm gonna be going a little off script here, but at the time of editing this video, Ember Lab just announced a brand new update for Kana, which seems to include a fair bit. God, my timing sucks. I was debating on postponing this video until the update came out just to talk about it, but from what I can see, it's mainly a lot of like smaller stuff, honestly. There's some new challenge modes, which seem like they could be a lot of fun, some tweaked boss fights, New Game Plus, which honestly gives me a great excuse to go back and play it again, and we got some new cosmetic upgrades. We got some new hats for the Rot, but my favorite are the new costumes for Kana. I mean, my god, some of these look great. Samurai Kana is best Kana. This update comes out in September, so if you have the game already, load it up and give it a try. I know I'm certainly going to. Again, New Game Plus seems like a perfect excuse for me to go and play this again, especially with the new costumes. Again, Samurai Kana is best Kana.
It's games like this that make me really excited for the future and even more anxious to see the capabilities of the next generation of game designers. And with the abilities present on the PS5 and Xbox Series X and hell, the modern day PC, this game has anything to go by. There's a lot to look forward to. Isn't that right, PS5? It can love.